And we'll be trying to figure out how to host a monthly call to build that network and to identify all the direct action and youth groups around the country, get them all on a list, and have them start having regular communications so they can do some broad brush coordination in terms of when the best times would be for that kind of activity. So please start thinking about who you know in your communities that are the direct action types or the youth organizers, and just have that in mind that we'll be wanting to connect all those folks together soon. We're also, with Fridays for the Future, you're welcome to invite all the youth to join them directly. And we could talk more, we'll send out a separate website on that if you'd like to connect the young people in your life to that organization. The marketing team is also doing incredible work, and it looks like we're lining up to have a big marketing industry conference, probably a one-day conference with CEOs from the top holding companies, and then also a hackathon, which would invite creatives from all over to participate in like a 48-hour brainstorming with little teams, and then they would come back and present their ideas on how to market the idea of stopping pollution, stopping our pollution, probably focused on Earth Bill mandates, but that's still to be determined. At a minimum, it would be about how to draw the public into the legislative demands of stopping our pollution. So that's exciting. The faith team is really going great, and there's all sorts of events coming up there. And we'll send that information out over listservs. And the website has been updated. I'm happy to report, and so please take a look at it. It has separate new pages now for the adopted district, and a map is there of ones that are adopted. And on adopted district, we're looking for more sort of inner team folks to help manage that, to interface with all the people who are adopting their districts, and just that case management, that volunteer case management is the main help we need. But then also to help convene the people who are interested in that team to work collectively to go out and get more adopted districts and fill in those gaps. Last I heard, we were over 77 in 26 states. Greg Wagner is now point person on adopted district, and Brenda Cohen has had to move on to some other things that she's working on. So if you have questions or anything like that, feel free to ask Greg, and he'll be maintaining all the lists. Also on the website is the climate bill package. Has been its own tab now, and we're still waiting to update bill numbers there, and also to add the newly elected congresspeople from last Congress. So updating that. So if you're looking there and you see those things, know that will be coming. And then the other piece on the website is we put the Earth Bill and the Earth Bill Network and those concepts on their own page as well, which also features, I can still share, I think, even though you can't hear me on this other computer. Let me see if I can screen share. I wanted to screen share the
Quiet. Todd? Can anyone hear Todd?
No.
No,
No, Todd is muted, I think.
He's got two devices going. Todd, we can't hear you.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
How long have I been
Since
muted?
you went over to the website.
Oh, I see. When I shared it, it must have taken my computer. So, all right, well, I was talking about the carbon clock. And as you can see, we have 6 years and 9 months before we put enough pollution in the air that we surpass 1.5 degrees. And then 24 years until we, that keeps bouncing out. So the clock is ticking is the bottom line on that. And then, so I'm having computer problems, obviously. So now I'm on the phone and I'll be able to share things back later. We'll see. So the clock ticking at that level just creates a sense of urgency, that has me freaked out and keeps us doing this work relentlessly as we're trying to find a way to unite the climate movement behind shared set of legislative demands. We're obviously in an exciting time on that front, and the administration and Congress are working on these things. There's lots of legislation, more than anyone could ever keep up with, since we're a bunch of volunteers, but we're trying. We have our existing 2020 bill package, which you're gonna get a refresher on today from Ed Dye. Then we have new bills to review for consideration, including the Clean Futures Act, which is the major initiative from the Democrats. And it's gotten some pretty good preliminary reviews. We're not gonna go into that in depth on this meeting, but it is sort of the focal point that we need to focus on and everyone look at and say what's missing. A few things that are missing is that even though it sets some goals, it doesn't have clear mandates. It leaves EPA to enforce some of the clean energy mandates and the vehicle mandates. So, if the administration changes and the EPA changes, that's not solid really. It doesn't, other than setting goals, it doesn't project what they think this bill will do in terms of actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and particularly on any timeline. So this is a critical information for any piece of climate legislation. And I'll touch on this again later, but the Congressional Budget Office, there's plenty of scientists out there. They should come up and tell us this bill, because if you just spend money, 10 million for this and 10 billion for that, it takes a lot of time for money to translate into results. So it's very unclear without mandates on the polluters themselves specifically, what a whole bunch of money spent on renewable and other transformational aspects, which are all critical and necessary, but what those will do without mandates on the polluting industries themselves. And so we can't afford, in my opinion, to just slip this by. And the administration is working very hard to get everybody in alignment and support their process. And they're arguing that the only options are these budget reconciliations. They're resisting the filibuster, getting rid of that arcane rule. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Maybe I'll talk about that next. But we want Rick to go. So the point is that there's just things missing. And there's also not a clear actionable demand. So what is the demand that's going to motivate the grassroots and direct action groups to go into their congressional offices and insist on something that we know will reduce greenhouse gases on a timeline that is certain, at least in terms of our hopes and the way it's written. So we can't follow, in my opinion, the administration entirely. We need to lead, and figure out how to lead and around what we can unite to lead is no easy task. So we'll be talking about later today, but the idea has emerged looking at all the various documents of a mandate-specific bill. I'm not going to get into it now, but I'll do a full presentation on that in a minute after the others. The main point I wanted to make real quick now is the filibuster. Everything depends on that being changed. The Equality Act, the George Floyd Act, the HR1, which is all about the voting and democracy, which could not be more important, and any greenhouse gas standards, mandates, obviously. So for all these really substantive pieces of immigration reform, we have to repeal the filibuster. So I'm already talking to my friends in New York. I'm not there right now, but they've already started organizing. There's an action coming up on, I'm not sure how public it is, but we'll be focusing on our efforts on Schumer. And there's a whole coalition that we've joined, Fix Our Senate. And in the email that I sent out, there's a link for groups to join that, to contact Jennifer. There's a briefing. And so I'm hoping that this might be one of our rallying cries. Between this and a mandates question, I'd like to propose that we poll our senators over the next few weeks on both of those issues. Would you support repeal of the filibuster, and do you support these quick mandates on electricity, vehicles, cement and steel, and agriculture? At least we could take the pulse of things as we plot our path forward. Okay, there'll be more announcements later about what we're doing in April. Don't let me forget. And I see some faith announcements in the chat from Nancy, and we could give Nancy an opportunity at the end to make that, to say that again as well. Okay, so first up, we're going to welcome Rick Jacobson from Environmental Investigation Agency to talk to us about this exciting farm international forestry bill, which I guess still doesn't have a name, Rick. I don't know, I'll leave that to y'all. Maybe we should have a name competition. And we went over this bill a lot last time, and so it should be familiar to a lot of people, but we have a lot of new folks this year. And so that's why we're reviewing this and the climate bill package from last year as the sort of a foundation for our building community and local coalitions that span the various passions and policy sectors. And that is really of our main purpose in compiling a bill package, is to unite the activists from these various arenas so that we can start to begin to almost maybe have the kind of political power we're going to need, particularly to get this through the Senate. So Rick, welcome back. It's good to see you again. And take it away, please.
Thanks, Todd. I appreciate the chance to update you on this bill. Still without a name. I think we're maybe letting the perfect be the enemy of the good there in our search for the perfect acronym, but we're going to have a name pretty soon. So I guess I'll just go through a short summary for those who haven't heard about this bill or didn't hear the presentation I did last summer now about the bill. So the purpose of the bill is to address the role of U.S. trade in driving deforestation around the world, and this is in recognition of the fact that, as probably everyone is aware, deforestation contributes anywhere from 10 to 15% of carbon emissions. Most of that deforestation is happening in the tropics, and if forests are properly managed and degraded forests are allowed to regenerate, that could actually contribute to a quarter or more of the total mitigation solutions for climate change. So it's a very critical piece, and the U.S. is a major importer of a lot of agricultural commodities that are linked to deforestation around the world. So this bill would put import restrictions on those commodities, and this includes at this point cattle, palm oil, pulp, soy, cocoa, rubber as a starting group, kind of the key group that's responsible for much of the commodity-driven deforestation around the world. So the bill would focus on imports. It would require importers to know their supply chains. If the supply chains lead to high-risk areas where deforestation is happening, they would have to know their full supply chain back to the point of production, and they would have to assure that any deforestation that was happening was happening within the limitations of national law. So I think it's an important point here that this bill focuses on illegal deforestation, which in some places like Brazil actually accounts for most deforestation right now. Brazil has pretty strong protections actually under its legal framework and its constitution. The problem is they're not being followed. So what this bill would allow the US to do is basically incentivize the kind of governance reforms and improved law enforcement that needs to happen in Brazil in order to start to address that issue. So it's not going to get at all deforestation, but it provides one avenue for pushing for supply chain traceability and ensuring that anything that comes into the US is sourced in accordance with foreign law. The bill would also provide some avenues for foreign assistance where the US could work with other countries and provide incentives for them to address deforestation and governance issues. It would have some measures to address financial crime related to deforestation and how those funds may enter international markets and US financial market. And it would also establish a US federal procurement preference for zero deforestation products. So if a supplier can demonstrate they have a zero deforestation policy and they're implementing it, they would get a bidding preference in their efforts to become a US supplier. So where the bill is at right now, we unfortunately the pandemic really slowed down the process. We were hoping to see this bill introduced last year. But there's still a lot of enthusiasm on the part of Senator Schatz and Representative Blumenauer, who have been the leads on it. Last week, Senator Schatz did an interview with CBS where he announced the bill, and their intention is to introduce the bill within the next couple of months or so. So we don't have an exact date, but we're pretty sure it's going to be happening soon. And the focus right now is on trying to find an original Republican co-sponsor, because that will make it a lot easier down the road to build bipartisan support. So right now there's a lot of behind the scenes outreach, both to industry and to Republicans, to socialize the bill and see if we can garner some support before introduction. And then I think, once we reach introduction, there's going to be a lot of work to be done to reach out to key members on the House and the Senate side. We're expecting companion bills on both sides to start to build, get the votes that we need. The bill as it's written is a standalone bill, but I think the Senator's office is probably going to be open to whatever options there are available to move the bill. But as written, it's a standalone. So I think I'll stop there and would be happy to answer any questions about it. And unfortunately, I can't stay for this whole meeting. So if possible, it'd be good if we could do questions
Sure.
now.
Absolutely, Rick. Well, thank you so much. As we talked about before, can you just say again what the enforcement mechanisms are for the legislation?
So because it's an import law, it would be the key elements of the import restrictions would be within the Tariff Act. So existing Tariff Act civil and criminal penalties would apply, which if Customs has the motivation, they actually have quite a lot of power. So I think the real challenge on enforcement is how do we get the right incentives and support in place so that this does become a Customs priority amongst all the different things that they're under pressure to implement.
Is there any vehicle for third party or outside or civil society to raise complaints or to verify or check? Or how can the outside world keep track of this? Oh my God.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good, important point. So we're looking at the forced labor prohibition that is already in the Tariff Act, which in its regulations has a mechanism by which any third party can submit evidence to Customs about forced labor in supply chains entering the U.S. So we advised on putting something like that in the bill, and it is in there. So there would actually be a way that any organization, any third party, whether in the U.S. or in an affected country, could contact and submit evidence to Customs around violations.
All right, that's great news. There's no way for them to initiate any kind of proceedings themselves, though, right? Like in
no, there's no civil. It doesn't create an avenue for kind of civil lawsuits or that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this is extremely exciting. I think that if that's it for now, I don't see any questions in the, oh wait, there was a question about the importation of grain. I missed it, but my computer keeps breaking up. Is there anything about grain that's relevant to that? I don't think so.
Grain. Soy is included on the list of commodities that would be covered, but the U.S. isn't much of an importer of soy from the Amazon and other biomes, where it's a problem down in Brazil. But it would be on the list. So any soy product would be covered, whether it's soy oil or soy meal. And I should have also mentioned that the idea is that a number of products would be covered as well, and that there would be a phase in over time of what those products which ones would be covered and subject to import declarations. There's a number of finished products that would be very relevant to this issue, whether it's various kinds of leather products or tires, for example. So it's quite an ambitious bill in its scope.
All right, well, very exciting. I think we have a draft of that bill in our discussion document. I don't know, is it okay that we have a draft? And that we're sharing a draft, or do you not want us to?
I think it would be better not to, to keep it limited. And that's in part because there's going to be another revision. So that's what, like a confidential discussion draft that's been doing the rounds. But we're expecting some changes, so I think it'd probably be better to leave that one out. And as soon as we have something we can share, we'll pass it on.
Okay, we're trying to figure out timing again on including this in the climate bill package like we were last year. So we're ready to add it so people can start asking people to co-sponsor, but we really can't do that without a draft. So I guess we have to hold off still.
Yeah, and I'm hesitant because the things have been kind of up in the air with the pandemic and the timing. So I'm hesitant to be too specific, but I know that there's a strong interest in trying to release this in advance of the Earth Day Climate Summit. But there's a lot of variables in that happening, but that is a possibility.
Okay, all right. Any idea if anything like this could go through any kind of budget reconciliation process?
We haven't talked to the experts about that, but probably not. It doesn't have a very strong budget component to it. So I think that would probably be a stretch.
Uh-huh.
But I'm not an expert on that. So.
All right, so we're gonna need to get rid of the filibuster for this bill too, it sounds like.
60 votes is always a challenge.
Yeah. All right, Rick, well, as always, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Final language, and everyone's excited about this bill. This is one of the most important bills for a PR, from a PR perspective, because not only is it substantively extremely important, but it sells saving forests internationally and stopping our destruction. Our role in the destruction is a really strong message, and people feel that passion. They feel for the orangutans in the Amazon and Indonesia, and so. The sooner the better. Let's get this bill in our bailiwick so we can start, promoting that message as part of the package concept. But I'm sure y'all know that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rick. We'll see you soon.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye. All right. Well, next up, we have Ed Dye, who's going to give us a wonderful overview of the climate bill package from the perspective of Florida. I was so excited when I saw Ed's presentation. I said, can we use it, et cetera? And he's like, yes, and he volunteered to present it. So thank you, Ed, so much for everything you're doing down in Florida. Just tell me your district and how you're connected to the next one over, so people can understand where you're coming from geographically.
Okay, well, I live in Pinellas County, which is Representative Charlie Crist's district. We live, but Pinellas County is St. Pete and Clearwater, and we're right across the bay from Tampa. So in Tampa, I have two cohorts who have been helping me on this presentation, Sarah Edwards and Michaela Clark, who are lobbying Kathy Castor. So we're going to use the same presentation for both of them. We don't have a date for Kathy Castor yet, but we do have a date for Charlie Crist on March the 23rd, 10 days from now. So if I could share my screen on my other computer. Okay. So like, this is a Florida, oh my. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me get started here. First, it's our intention to share our climate stories before we really get started here, but this is the presentation. Because we share our views on 10 different bills, and since we have a limited time, we'd like to hold any questions or discussion about these bills to the end, and we would be more than happy to schedule further meetings with you to discuss these bills in further detail. What we're here to show you is why we need Representative Crist to co-sponsor these bills. I'm going to treat the first 4 farming and land bills together in terms of the need. Then I'll explain what each of them accomplish. So why should the representative of a mostly urban county care about the agricultural bills? Well, our prairies are being turned into deserts by our agricultural practices. It's hard to bring life back into these soils. It takes several years, and the worse the desertification, the longer it takes. Moreover, our water table is running dry, exacerbated by the drought. But here again, our farming practices are making it worse. As to how much it contributes to global warming, the science is unclear. But it's the only contributor that, if corrected, has the potential to take carbon out of the air and put it back into the soil. This is critical for Florida. No scientist can tell us how long it will take for all of this, for the ice in Greenland and Antarctica to melt. But they tell us that if it does, the seas will rise 260 feet, wiping Florida off the map. So the sooner we can take carbon out of the air, the sooner we can stop the melting. We're seeing that conventional farming techniques are really destructive to the soil. Too much plowing is used. The soil erosion from conventional plowing is so much higher, and it's 100 times higher than the natural process by which the soil is regenerated. Farm-related emissions also come in the form of methane from cows burping in large feces pits and nitric oxide from synthetic fertilizer, which have a much greater effect on thickening the greenhouse gas layer. But it's also the transportation and energy used in the process of raising and processing meat and the food that they need. Large deforestation is happening around the world to make room for more corn and soybeans for cattle feed, industrialized growing of palm oil, and more land for raising livestock. And the sequestering of carbon in the soil has probably the biggest potential of any single measure to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. Dr. Ratan Lal just won the World Food Prize in June. He did a peer-reviewed study with some others a couple of years ago, showing that the technical potential for pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere by sequestering carbon in the soil is more than 150 parts per million. That's almost the entire difference between the pre-industrialized times and now. But that phrase, technical potential, means that it's not necessarily what's likely to happen, but it does measure what could happen if we have the political will. And it gives us a measure of the very large amounts of carbon sequestration that we can expect if we adopt regenerative agricultural practice. So what is regenerative agriculture? It starts with understanding your soil, what it needs, and what contributes, what combination of crops and cover crops will minimize weed growth and insect destruction so that the chemicals can be eliminated. It eliminates tilling, keeps the ground covered with vegetation at all times, and integrates planned grazing techniques with livestock. This is the potential projections for how these practices can remove carbon from the air in the years ahead on a global basis. And if you compare the two approaches, conventional and no-till, you can see that in the first few centimeters, the carbon buildup is much greater with the organic approach, all the way down to 10 centimeters. Not so much beneath that, but the top is the part that counts the most. And that's where you get the enhanced productivity in the soil as well. No-till is growing in the US. I wish it was growing faster. It is growing pretty fast for wheat, but we need to speed that up and find ways to incentivize it. Now, the first bill, the Agricultural Resiliency Act, rewards farmers for promoting carbon sequestration and healthy soil with taxes, incentives, and carbon market. Investing in research and support for farmers practicing pasture-based livestock, additional grants and loans to help farmers transition to clean energy alternatives for their power needs. And lastly, robust new federal programs aimed at reducing food waste in schools, as well as restaurants and large institutions, and standardizing food date labels to reduce confusion among consumers. The Climate Stewardship Act would bolster existing programs we have in place. It funds and expands federal programs to reduce or offset 1/3 of agricultural emissions by 2025. A remarkable objective. By funding programs through the USDA and providing technical assistance to help farmers incorporate climate stewardship practices, such as no-till, cover crops, and planned grazing. Then it grants funding for clean on-farm energy by helping farmers make the transition to solar, wind, or biofuels. That's the first part of it. Then the second part of it, which may be locally beneficial, is planting 16 billion trees, including 400 million in urban areas, focusing on low-income communities and communities of colors. These are neighborhoods that do not have the benefits of tree canopies that benefit the air quality in the area and that lower ambient temperatures to eliminate heat zones from concrete, both of which have an impact on public health. It restores and protects 2 million acres of wetlands that not only sequester carbon, but provide a line of defense for the hurricanes that threaten our area. Then lastly, it invests in regional food systems, from investing in local community gardens to helping small and medium-sized farmers deliver food to local communities, reducing the emissions from transporting. Now, part of the overall food problem is exacerbated by the lack of competition in the marketplace, of which 85% of beef is controlled by 4 corporations, and 90% of the grain is controlled by 4 corporations. So farmers are forced to sell into a market at lower prices, and the share of each retail dollar the farmer gets has been squeezed from 41 cents in 1950 to 15 cents today. This is having a damper on support for regenerative farming practices. So this bill would immediately halt corporate consolidation within the farming industry, food and beverage manufacturing, and retail grocery, while a commission investigates the impact of this hyper-consolidation on climate. The Farm System Reform Act overlaps on what the first 2 bills cover, but this bill is more of a stick approach, whereas the first 2 bills are more of a carrot approach. It targets concentrated agricultural feeding operations, or CAFOs, which produce an enormous amount of waste and harmful pollution. It phases out large CAFOs by 2040. It immediately halts new construction and expansion of large CAFOs and invests $100 billion over 10 years for a just transition to regenerative farming practices. This frees up farmers who are locked into contracts with large corporations where they're still hovering around the poverty line and not able to break out of that system. That completes the Farming and Land Bill. We need Representative Chris' co-sponsorship of all of these bills. Next, I'll turn our attention to 3 issues that we've grouped into the category of materials. refrigerants, plastics, and toxic pesticides. The material and product we consume for our own comfort and convenience can have devastating impacts on the planet. There is a common thread in these issues. Industry has played an outsized role in creating the problem, concealing the harm, blocking solutions, and shirking responsibility for its damage, and has also promoted cognitive dissonance in consumers' perceptions of the harm caused by their use of these materials. In its comprehensive plan to reverse global warming, Drawdown ranks refrigeration transition and management as the #1 solution because hydrofluorocarbons, otherwise known as HFCs, have a global warming potential that is usually thousands of times that of carbon dioxide, mostly at the point of disposal, a fact that is not well known among the general public. Fortunately, most of the original act that was crafted to deal with HFCs through the set of comprehensive policy elements was included in the Energy Act of December 21st, 2020, which was signed into law as part of the year-end omnibus spending bill. And we thank you for your support and vote on this important issue. Therefore, we'd like to swiftly shift to us to discussing next topics, plastics. While plastic is undeniably useful material, plastic products are hugely problematic throughout their life cycle, accounting for significant greenhouse gas emissions during production and distribution, as well as devastating amounts of waste that poison our food, air, and water. In fact, the emission problem is so big with these products that if the plastic industry were a country, it would be the 5th largest producer of greenhouse gases. The petrochemical industry has been irresponsibly pushing plastic products on consumers and then blaming those consumers the municipalities they live in for not disposing of their waste properly, when in fact, many of their products are not really recyclable and unnecessary in the first place. Plastic waste has especially devastating effects on our oceans and waterways. 13.9 million tons of plastic go into the ocean every year. And while an average plastic bag is used for just 12 minutes, it will take hundreds of years to break down. Less than 10% of plastic ever created has been recycled. This is clearly not sustainable. Here in Florida, we have an extra vested interest in keeping our water clean of plastic pollution. Yet the throwaway convenience culture is as pervasive here as anywhere. The pandemic has only seen this get worse. This is also an environmental justice issue. The US makes up just 4% of the world's population, but accounts for 16% of the plastic waste worldwide. We've been dumping our plastic waste on developing nations, blaming them for improper disposal, and destroying their coastlands and putting their food, water, and wildlife at risk. Further, living near a plastic production plant has been shown to have a severe health impacts, including cancer, and it's often low-income communities and communities of color that bear the brunt. But despite all this, plastic production is increasing rapidly and is projected to emit 2.8 billion tons of greenhouse gases annually by 2050. We simply cannot address climate change without addressing this issue. The Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act of 2020 forces the industry to establish minimum recycling requirements and creates a nationwide bottle return refund program. It holds corporations accountable for cleaning up plastic pollution by forcing the plastic industry to come up with ways to clean up our plastic pollution problem and fund those processes. It bans the use of single-use, non-recyclable products by 2022 at the latest. It halts construction of all new plastic producing facilities, and it prevents plastic waste from being shipped to developing countries. We need Representative Chris' support and co-sponsorship of this bill. Now let's take a look at toxic pesticides. The pesticide problem has become a vicious circle, with poor practices leading to unintended consequences that allow pests to build up in their resistance, in turn leading to increased use of pesticides. Of course, our focus on regenerative farming could significantly reduce and hopefully eventually eliminate the need for pesticides. But in the meantime, there is more we must do to reduce toxin use. Organophosphates, neonicotinoids, and the herbicide paraquat are particularly harmful to human health and have been related to numerous serious health conditions. Children are especially vulnerable. It is noteworthy that chemicals are so dangerous that with one minor exception, they are banned outright in Canada and the EU. However, they are commonly used in the US due to industry influences on regulation. These pesticides have devastated bee populations as well as many other insects essential for healthy ecosystems. Studies are showing that bee population declines affect our food security by increasing crop yields. In the US, the production of crops that depend on pollinators is estimated to generate more than $50 billion a year. Now, the Protect America's Children from Toxic Pesticides Act would restore balance to protect ordinary citizens. It would educate and empower frontline communities to speak out and demand justice from corporations. It will ban the use of toxic chemicals currently banned in the EU and Canada until they are thoroughly reviewed. It will close loopholes that have allowed emergency exceptions, and it will protect farm workers from requiring employers to report pesticide injuries with penalties for failure or retaliation by developing better labeling, including foreign languages. This is a critical bill to protect our air, water, soil, and our children, and we need Representative Chris' co-sponsorship. Next, I'll turn my attention to two issues we've grouped into the category of fossil fuel management and banning Fracking Act, and the End Polluter Welfare Act. The problems with every stage of our fracking process are seen in global warming, in our environment, and in regulation. Methane's impact on global warming is 80 times greater than CO2 emissions, yet current federal regulations on fracking is almost non-existent, prompting significant concerns about environmental and public health risks. In our next slides, I'll discuss how Florida's environment is particularly affected by fracking. This map indicates where the oil and gas industry has sought to extract fossil fuels in the state. Not all these sites produced oil and gas, but with fracturing technologies, some of these may now be able to produce fossil fuel. All neighboring counties to these sites are subject to the impacts of fracking through the extension of horizontal drilling techniques, which can expand for miles. Fracking would pose a serious risk to Florida's agriculture. Aquifer, which provides 93% of our drinking water due to faulty piping and fissures. Fracking would additionally threaten our surface soil, atmosphere, traffic patterns, severity, and frequency of natural disasters, and the crucial sustainability of our Everglades and wildlife sanctuaries, specifically the Big Cypress National Preserve, a key part of the Everglades system. What is the solution to the problems? Banning fracking. According to Floridians Against Fracking, 65% of Florida residents live in a city or county that has passed a local resolution supporting a statewide ban on fracking, and 77% live in a city or county that has opposed pro-fracking regulatory bills. Although fracking is currently restricted in Florida and banned outright in several others, fracking infrastructure is still being built. Lynn Ringenberg, a professor emeritus at the USF Health, co-founder of PSR Florida and retired US Army colonel, states an outright ban is the only way to fully combat the dangers to the health and safety of the public and the planet. If passed, the Ban Fracking Act would ban fracking nationwide by January 1st, 2025, immediately halt new permits for fracking and its infrastructure, revoke current permits for fracking wells within 2,500 feet of homes, schools, and other inhabited structure, support a just transition to fossil fuels, workers, and local economies of communities that have relied on fossil fuel economy. We need Representative Chris' co-sponsorship of this bill. Next, I'll turn to subsidies. This graph gives us a perspective on the disparities of U.S. taxpayer subsidies to the fossil fuel industry compared to renewable energy industry. Currently, American taxpayers are on the hook for about $15 billion in direct federal subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, while a much smaller share goes towards renewable energies like solar and wind. This chart from 2016 shows how, in terms of permanent tax expenditures, fossil fuels beat renewables by a 7-to-1 margin. Now, the primary federal tax support for renewable energy, the investment and production tax credits, respectively, are set to phase out over the next 5 years and are politically vulnerable in the meantime. But if you include them, permanent fossil fuel tax breaks still win at 7.4 billion to 5.6 billion. The End Polluter Welfare Act will eliminate many subsidies in the fossil fuel industry to level the competitive balance. It will update the royalty rates for production on federal land and recoup offshore drilling royalties. Further, it ends government funding of research and development, and it funds the Black Lung Disability Fund for coal workers that have provided energy for Americans for decades. We need Representative Chris' co-sponsorship of this bill as well. The last bill addresses environmental justice. Emerging science shows that communities of color, indigenous people, and impoverished communities bear a disproportionate harm from environmental justice issues. Why? Largely because they live closer to the pollution, live in a community where sunny day flooding is common, or work in an infected industry like fishing and agriculture. We have several examples of this right here in Florida. Our air ranks third in highest CO2 emissions in the nation and has continued to receive a subpar air quality rating by the American Lung Association, leaving these communities at a higher risk for illnesses like emphysema, bronchitis, and lifetime asthma. Over 1 million acres of our land and water has been classified as impaired by mercury, with the EPA study reporting 1/3 of the freshwater fish sampled in Florida exceeds the EPA recommended total mercury criteria for human health, which many local tribes like the Miskasuki tribe in Tampa depend on for sustenance. Sinkholes and brownfields are more common in Florida than any other state, especially in communities represented by low-income folks and people of color. Our warming climate, with 2020 being the hottest year to date in Florida, threatens 1/3 of Florida's land from a 27-inch sea level rise. On the list of the 20 urban areas in America that will suffer the most from rising sea, Florida has 5: St. Petersburg, Tampa, Miami, Miami Beach, and Panama City. The passing of this bill would help resolve these immediate and important issues by amending the Civil Rights Act to allow citizens and communities to seek legal remedies when policies or practices cause a disparate impact. What this translates to is, if you have a manufacturing policy that is being consistently set up in a certain community where the individuals cannot prove discrimination intent, they can still seek legal remedy in lawsuits because of the dispute fallout. Currently, the law requires that the EPA would have to address something like this, so the bill would empower the citizens in the community to do so. It grants $75 million annually for research and program development to reduce public health disparities. It would require federal agencies to consider cumulative health effects when permitting under the Clean Air and Clean Water Act, and it would provide economic assistance for fossil fuel dependent communities and provide a just transition for workers and local economies that would be paid for in this bill by new fees on coal, oil, and gas. We need Representative Chris' co-sponsorship of this bill. That concludes our presentation of this bill. Thank you for your time today. We appreciate your interest and commitment. We urgently address the climate crisis. We would also like to offer follow-up meetings as needed. Do you have any questions for us as we begin our discussion today? Thank you again, and we look forward to continuing to work with you on this package.
And the crowd burst into applause and cheers across the virtual world.
Thank you.
That was brilliant. That was so brilliant. When I first saw it, it was brilliant, but to hear it is amazing. Go ahead, everybody. Give your accolades in the chat. Please do. It's just extremely exciting to see, Ed, how you and your team have pulled this and taken hold of it and made it your own and put all this incredible work into it. It just it has me very happy today that that this is actually working. And you make such a compelling case. I'm convinced myself. So thank you very much. This is wonderful. It's been shared, everyone, and we're going to forge ahead because it's already 1 o'clock and we got a couple more big things to do. But thank you, Ed, and don't everybody bombard Ed with requests for presentations. You got to do your own, but you can have the presentation, I think, and then modify it. And there's another example. The Faith team has done one as well, so we'll be posting these. And just on that note, the last piece of the updates to the website and everything is the toolkit for the adopted district. And we're going to be working on that very shortly to clean that up. But you guys are experts, so you don't really need my help as much as you guys can do it your own, clearly. All right, so moving on, we're going to have Art Matusov, who's our legislative liaison now, and he's been doing wonderful work. And let's see if Christine can find Art in the group and welcome him. And Art's going to give us a quick rundown of about, I think, 7 bills, 2 of you've already heard about. Real quickly, just to put them on your radar, this whole idea of adding bills to the package is very challenging. We've always committed to it. But as you can see with the timeline that we're facing and the Clean Futures Act taking focus, and there's just so many bills. So anyway, we'll see how we're going to try to include these. There'll be a little poll at the end of this, and you can get your preliminary thoughts, but obviously this is just your first exposure to some of these, so we don't expect answers. But we will poll on the climate bill package and the forestry bill, even though you haven't seen it. So anyway, we'll take it away. Art, thank you for everything. And please go ahead. Yes.
The PowerPoint showing? Okay. So we've got about 7 bills right now, or 6, that we're considering adding to the bills from last session that we were supporting. As Todd discussed at the beginning, the biggest one is the Clean Future Act, which sets greenhouse gas pollution targets, reaching 50% of reduction in greenhouse gas from 2005 by 2030, and having a full 100% clean economy with net zero greenhouse gas pollution by 2050. The kind of weaknesses of the legislation that Todd also described is it puts the onus on states to come up with plans and goals, and if they don't provide plans, or they miss their goals, the EPA can set carbon fees on the states that kind of are supposed to help the state kind of achieve their overall goal, but it's not really clear how effective or what the details of that would be. So it kind of leaves a lot of room for missed goals without really any clear indication of how that would be enforced by the EPA. And it also provides a lot of funding for investments in various decarbonization efforts. kind of some of the main highlights, I guess, is that in the for the power sector, I believe that it requires clean energy for the electricity, retail electricity generation to be 100% clean energy by 2035. And it provides $100 billion to over the next decade to electrify transportation. But even there aren't necessarily mandates.
So, Art, go ahead and move on from the clean futures because we're going to spend more time on that later. And we just started looking at that last night, I know. So
Yes. Then we've got the Protecting America's Economy from the Carbon Bubble Act, which prohibits financial companies like bank holding companies, savings and loan holding companies from involvement in fossil fuel production. So they can't make loans or investments in fossil fuel companies or projects, and things of that nature. The Justice for Black Farmers Act, it focuses on the USDA and providing resources to Black farmers and aspiring Black farmers, and such as it creates a farm conservation corps, which would provide labor, free labor and training for existing Black farms, and it provides resources for farmland ownership and succession disputes, as well as land. The USDA would provide land grants of up to 160 acres to existing and aspiring Black farmers. Then there's the Future Generations Protection Act, and that would prohibit emission of any greenhouse gas in any quantity from new electric utility steam generation. It would prohibit hydraulic fracking on all offshore and all onshore and offshore land within the jurisdiction of the United States, starting in 2025. And it prohibits exports of domestically produced crude oil and natural gas, although it does allow the president to, in certain cases, to continue exports, including with Mexico and Canada. Then there's the Reclaim Act and the American Jobs and Energy Manufacturing Act. Both of those are sponsored by Senator Manchin, and they're geared towards conservation programs for abandoned coal mines, and the American Jobs and Energy Manufacturing Act also is kind of intended for those communities, and provides $8 billion to invest in American manufacturing and industry to retrofit existing manufacturing industrial facilities to produce or recycle energy products, including things like advanced electric grid, energy storage and fuel cell equipment, equipment for the production of low carbon, low emission fuels, chemicals and products, renewable energy and energy efficiency equipment, from insulation to geothermal drills. And there's carbon capture is also one of the areas that it would seek to provide funding for. And then for advanced light, medium and heavy duty vehicles. And then finally, there's the Schatz bill, which was already discussed and was already kind of included in our last climate package. That bill still hasn't been introduced, so we're still waiting on the full details of the reforestation bill. And that's it.
All right, Art, thank you so much for, I know you were just getting all these together. There's like dozens and dozens of bills that he's been reviewing and all of that. So we just pulled these out to try to highlight some that might be of interest to the team. And we're just going to have to figure out going forward how to have that next level of conversation. And there are some, and just to go through those. So, sorry. That's it for today. So we can stop that screen sharing. And if you don't mind, Christine, if you could share my slide presentation, because I don't think my computer is going to do it. And so, all right. Well, right now we're going to turn to a new proposal. Earth Bill 1, Stop Our Pollution. To my mind, we're dedicating our lives and sacrificing a lot for this movement and for this moment. And for me, that means I want to have an impact that is significant to the trajectory. I don't want to just organize in the normal course of business and join the stream and be part of that. We want to do something significant, and it's critical that we also set the standards in motion that are going to redirect the economy and stop our pollution. So this is no small feat, but it appeared to me that there were certain common elements from all the various proposals and the organizations and coalitions that we're connected to, and it was really about the mandates. So if you could go to the next slide. I'm not seeing the slide in presentation mode on my phone. If you could go to presentation mode, Christine. Go ahead to presentation mode for the document. I'm just going to pull it up on my side so I can see it, and I'll just start talking while this is happening. Let me see if I can screen. Oh no, I guess I can't screen share. Here it comes.
I went to presentation mode and it's only giving me the side panel.
Click. All right. Let me just.
Let me end it, Todd, and just reboot it. Okay, just one second.
So as Christine works on that, I'll go ahead and start talking. I could try to share as well, but my computer is really having a problem.
Here it comes. How's that?
There you go. All right, go ahead to the next screen, the next slide. You can just use your cursor at the bottom, should move it to the next one. Cursor.
Yeah. Do you hear that little noise in the background? It's not working.
Oh
my
All right, well, let me see if I can screen share.
Oh, wait, how's that?
Yep, there you go.
Okay.
All right. So the idea is a 2030 moonshot for Earth, to put mandates in a 2-page bill that would be 100% renewable energy by 2030, 100% zero emission vehicles by 2030, 100% zero emissions on cement and steel by 2030. And then we work to soak it all back up by 100% regenerative farming by Big Ag by 2030. Next slide. Here you can see the coalition alignment. The VICA document, which is US CAN, has 100% renewables by zero emission vehicles. OFF-ACT, same thing. Some of them are 2030, some of them are 25, which is Food and Water Watch. The EDF letter that you're familiar with from police, zero emission transportation, 100% clean power by 2035. The Thrive bill, which we've seen a preview of, has goals in it too. They're not really mandates, but they're included in their spending bill proposal. 100% clean energy by 2035, 100% zero emissions by new vehicles by 2030. Next slide. The Clean Futures Act has these emission standards you just heard about, 80% by 2030, 100% by 2035. The House Climate Crisis Committee has 100% vehicles. World Resource Institute is talking about carbon standards for cement and steel. And then the Auto Association is even on board with 100% of electric vehicles by 2030. Next slide. Here you can see VICA listed in US CAN. Over 195 organizations are part of that. We won't slide down, but if you look on your own version of the presentation, you could scroll down and they're all listed. Next slide. Same with the EDF sign-on letter, a whole bunch of organizations. Go ahead, next slide. the G&D table, which is working on the Thrive Act. You see those groups working on that, led by the Working Families Party. And there's a whole ground game associated with that bill. We won't go into that bill, but later we'll tell you more about it. We'll let them do their rollout. Go ahead. Next slide. The Food and Water Watch bill was done with 400 groups and the OFF Act, and that list is there. Next slide. So you can see from those previous slides that if we have this common denominator of mandates, if we could get all of those groups and all those organizations backing a mandates bill, we would have a very powerful force pressing Congress to act. There's, of course, some key definitions that are important here. Clean energy, zero emissions, big agriculture, regenerative agriculture. Go ahead to the next slide. We're conducting input on all of that, as you probably have seen in various emails, and we invite more input. The various teams, electricity sector is looking at clean energy. We'll collect various definitions. This is the one from the OFF Act. Go ahead to the next one. Major agriculture, we're working on that definition. There's some references to the USDA. Go ahead, next slide. Regenerative agriculture, same thing. We're working on that. Emily and others are working on this. Next one. So the incentives enforcement strategy is important because everyone thinks we're trying to force our way into a budget reconciliation bill. So this hook is partly for that and partly because it's a good hook to attach it to tax deductions. And not just regular deductions, but all their ordinary and necessary business deductions. So that's your rent, all your employees, all your cost of doing business. We could double deductions up front or give credits even for transition costs if you want to make them loans. And then the important piece is to eliminate deductions, the ordinary business deductions for non-compliance. And no business can really survive without being allowed those deductions. And these are better than credits because credits can become a cost of doing business. You took the credits, you lost the credits, et cetera. But deductions, general business deductions, are a powerful piece of enforcement. Next slide. There's some draft mandate language. Just you can see how sort of straightforward it is to do this kind of thing. It could literally be a couple pages. I'm working on it. These pieces are pulled from the Off Fossil Fuels Act. Next slide. So are you ready to get arrested? This is the question I always ask activists, you know, what's the demand that we're going to get arrested for? And so this is a clear demand for the activists. And it's a unifying demand for the movement. It's a real greenhouse gas reduction law that's measurable. It's a major market signal to implement private sector and action and government action. We can make this a positive message, the pollution solution, and talk about responsibility. It's our production, our consumption, and our pollution. And then set this collective mission as a positive thing, a 2030 moonshot for Earth. And so I think we could change this altogether. It would set more aggressive timelines, obviously, but you always let them negotiate. You start with your position and then, you know, let the other side push back. You don't start with concessions. And then you could actionize this very clearly. Electric consumers, we could have it all that people return their bills with a big red marker on it, go clean. And we can make sure that all the cities' streetlights posts are charging outlets. And so there are ways to make this sort of a community lift. Next slide. And the real point is about building movement power. I mean, none of these issues, none of those bills that we're listing have enough power alone. So again, we have to unite across the sectors. The opposition is united. It's big ag, big oil, big pharma. So these mandates would really get at the heart of what they don't want to have happen. And since they control our Congress, these mandates would be their worst nightmare. And together we could call the question on who controls the power in Congress and retake our democracy. Next slide. This carbon clock I talked about in the beginning, but here you have it again. The timelines are just horrifying and the destruction has begun. And the administration wants to do this in a sort of a copacetic way of spending money. It's hard to get, you know, get people riled up against spending money on the right things. But go to the next slide. I just don't think that we have the kind of time to avoid putting these clear market signals in place. So a test of all of our action is what are the projected greenhouse gas reduction impacts of new laws? We need to know this about the Clean Futures Act. We should demand this of any bill that the administration is claiming is a climate bill. What is the timeline for those greenhouse gas reductions based on these new laws? Who is going to build the renewables, the government or the private sector? And what government agency is in charge of implementation and oversight? These are core questions we need to ask of everything. Next slide. So that's the proposal, Earth Bill 1, Stop Our Pollution. Come up with a 2-page bill that we can sell to activists. I think the direct action folks are going to be excited about this. They've been waiting for a demand. It would be something that we lead on instead of following. Everything else in the pipeline is us guessing at what's going on and following the administration somewhat blindly along, except for the Clean Futures Act, which is really clear now, actually. And it's showing what's missing. And I think these pieces are what's missing. And to the extent they're not missing, they're affirming of a lot of other ideas and commitments. So everything ran a little long today. And I know I wanted to have more time to think about this a little bit and discuss it. But for now, we're going to go ahead and do a poll. If Christine, you could pop the poll up there. Oh, I think I can do it. So here's the poll on strategy. Here it goes. Let's see if it works. Go ahead and please answer this poll. Some of the questions: you strongly support repeal of the filibuster. This is to find out how much support there are. This is just really a straw poll. We're not going to hold anybody to any of this. And if you do support repeal of the filibuster, would you check with your senator about their position on that? Then, do you like the theme of ending our pollution? That's an interesting question, because that seems to be the focus of all of that. And do you like the idea of a mandate-focused demand for our current action? That's important. That's the question on the table. And then would you be willing to check your senator's position on mandates if we had like a poll, just a questionnaire really on those 2 points? So I'll let you keep answering that. And then we have another poll on the bills, but this is more important for now. So just take your time and go ahead and do that. Let's see, it's 1:19. We're doing great. A couple of announcements while you're voting on the poll. And nobody's going to hold you to this. Just give your initial, inclinations and so take the sense of the room, as they call it. And in the meantime, I'm just going to invite Nancy to come up and give a quick announcement, if she'd like, about the faith meeting that's coming up. Nancy, would you like to say a little something about that?
Sure. Thank you, Todd. Yes, we planned, I'm from Metro New York Catholic Climate Movement, and there are several of us on the steering committee that are working with this project and find it exciting. And we're planning a webinar for March 20th at 11 o'clock in the morning. That's a Saturday. It's an hour and a half, and it would be to outreach specifically to a Catholic community in our networks. And all are invited, but the messaging will be specifically to draw in a Catholic audience and hopefully to adopt districts. And I'll put the link in the chat again and for people to register. And thank you.
Wonderful, so exciting.
Todd will be with us. That's one thing. And Art.
And Art,
yes.
And hopefully I'll be able to say something that makes sense. Lavona, did you have anything you wanted to say from your end, or Jonathan, anything about the marketing, just a minute or two?
Hi, this is Lavona. I'll just say, and I'm putting information in the chat about the upcoming March. This is our monthly meeting that's now going to be kind of ongoing of the faith team. And you need to join the faith team list. So I have put that information in there. And then we are having weekly meetings, sort of an inner group of folks that are a working group, and that's on Mondays at 3:30. So if you're in the faith team community and are interested in those things, I'll also put my email address in there. And I'm now also putting a handout that's kind of tailored as a one-pager with a flavor towards the faith community, but it has a lot of the links that pertain to all of the things that we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you, wonderful. And I'm just gonna add in the chat, if I can do this without breaking everything. And so it looks like, Christine, you stopped the poll and you started sharing the results, is that right?
That's right. People had stopped answering, so I stopped it.
Wonderful, thank you. Adopt, volunteer. If you've not adopted your district yet, I'm begging you to adopt your district. There's nothing that's more important. And you don't have to stay the lead forever. Just adopt your district so we have somebody on the list and you can help us find the right person to take over. You can have multiple leads in any district. This is the most important thing. We have to get our ground game ready for whatever it is we're going to do. And we're leading by example on this, and it seems like we're going to be partnering with Green Faith and hopefully other groups in doing this. The Fridays for the Future, the youth are doing their own parallel adopted district with us, which is very exciting. So they'll be taking in the names and keeping track of their volunteers, et cetera. So please do that. Jonathan, did you want to say anything briefly about the marketing?
Yeah, sure. I wasn't clear if you wanted me to speak because I was tap dancing to fill time while the poll was being taken. But assuming that the poll is now finished, I'll just say that yeah, we had a good meeting this week with the Association of American Advertising Agencies, which is the big industry trade group across all agencies. And we are working with a couple of independent agencies to put together the event that Todd referenced at the top of the call. So it's a two-part event. One is sort of a traditional bringing together of prominent folks within the advertising industry to decide on how we can kind of put our shoulder to the wheel to support the efforts of the climate movement writ large and this group in particular. And then the second part, also referenced by Todd, is a hackathon, which is more of a kind of hands-on event where we are going to get some creative industry professionals together to actually do some of the work to figure out how we can build an actual campaign to support these efforts. We'll figure out how to fund that campaign down the road, but first step is to figure out, how can we use the communication skills of the advertising industry to support the overall effort.
Oh, thank you so much, Jonathan. This is a very exciting movement. We've been working on pulling this industry into the mix for quite a while, and it's finally happening. It's very exciting. So I'm seeing, so here's the results from the poll. I guess everyone saw them. And after I do that, I'll just launch the second poll. So strongly support, so 72% and maybe 17%. So that's strong support there, with no coming in, 4 no's. People willing, 81% willing to check their vote, check the position of the senator. Ending our pollution has a lot of support, no opposition. And the idea of a mandate focused demand, 72%. Yes, maybe 28%, so 10, and then no opposition. And folks are willing to check, seems like with their, so that's wonderful. The other poll is a little less important at this point, but we're gonna go ahead and do it. It's just about all those bills. I frankly think you got too much information and not enough information to even answer this poll. So don't feel, if you don't want to, then don't worry about it. It's too soon to poll you. But the 21 bill package, hopefully everyone already supports. I just put it there again to affirm that. And then the other new bills that you've heard about today, just to get a little straw poll, if we're going in the right direction. All right, 126. Well, we packed in a lot today. Our next major call is on Wednesday, the March 23rd, I want to say. No, it's 24th. Yes, at noon. And everyone who's in the policy sector or other groups, you know who you are. You're all having regular meetings. It's really incredible. The definitions are flowing in. And by April, so the timeline in terms of our own work is by April, we want to have quite a few events, not events really, but a focus on lobbying meetings. So you can start setting those up now. It takes forever, as you know, to get those in motion. Even if you haven't adopted your district, don't worry, go ahead, forge ahead. Don't let anything we're doing slow you down, because there's so much lead time, and bringing people together in your community and then setting up those meetings and then actually getting them on the books. So it'll take a while. But the real important meeting that I'd like to encourage everyone to think about is community-wide meetings. So convening the leaders in your community, figure out who helped raise the money for the political campaign, who runs the PTA, who runs various social groups in your community that have friends and are people will listen to them and they like being involved as a community person. We have to find those people outside of the climate movement and bring them in, because the battle that we're up against is going to be huge. And so the resistance is really yet to begin to fight. And so building this infrastructure on the ground is the most important thing we can do. And then we'll see how we wield it once we have that infrastructure in place. I guess that's everything for today. While you finish the poll, I just share that this work is sort of exhausting. It's a little overwhelming. It's unclear what role we're playing and whether it'll be impactful or not. And I'm always on the search for that. And because there's a lot of meetings and a lot of activity that doesn't result in results. And I'm not in favor of that kind of activity, but it's very difficult for us, to have an impact. As great as our little project is going, it's a small potatoes compared to the forces in motion. So we just have to think always about that. I think we're doing incredible work. The meetings, the bill package is all wonderful. The adoption is all wonderful. But just keep thinking about how we're going to escalate, how we're going to make this more powerful, how we're going to zero in on the key issues, greenhouse gas reduction timelines, counting greenhouse gas emissions and the projected reductions. These pieces, just keep them in your mind. I think that we can add value added in these areas. And hopefully we can move the dial a little bit. I think on the filibuster, we could be very helpful. And we're, as I said, the email went out, please join that coalition via your groups if you'd like directly, but we'll keep the information flowing as well. But figure out who else in your community is interested in getting rid of the filibuster. All those bills I listed, almost every topic you could imagine hinges on this. So there's an opportunity for intersectionality like never before. We have common cause. And then if we get rid of the filibuster, a lot of our, feeling impossible dreams become much more viable, much more viable. So I think things are crystallizing a little bit along that line. We'll get this Earth Bill 1, stop our pollution into shape for review. There's some feedback on that in the name and all that. We'll have to mull all that over. Most important thing I want to share is that we can't slow down to get everything perfect. There's momentum and now's the time, and it's full steam ahead. What we do in the next 6 months is going to be outcome determinative in a lot of ways for the future of this planet. It's hard to believe I'm to even say something so ridiculous, but it's true. So now's the time to start zeroing in on activities and use of your time that is really going to get to the senators on these key issues. And so that's my pitch. We already shared the results of the poll. Let's see what they say. Bill package seems fine, strong. Oh my gosh, these other bills have a lot of support considering how new and informational they were. And there are some caveats, in the Energy Manufacturing Act. I've already heard from Climate Justice Alliance about the cap trade, the carbon trading issues. Everyone knows that that's problematic. But anyway, so we're at least going in the right direction. And if you have other bills you think should be top priority for us to, focus on, and please send those ideas along. Well, I think that's it for today. I feel like I was a little discombobulated because I couldn't see you and I'm just talking through this phone, but there you all are. Thank you for everything. We can definitely stay on. We'll conclude the formal part of the meeting. And if anyone has any follow-up questions or one-on-one questions that you'd like to chat with me about or ask, we'll just sort of have an open Q&A period here for a minute. Because I know you're hard at work and I don't want you having to wait for anything from me to forge ahead. So I'll just hang on the line, and for now, we'll conclude the formal meeting, and we'll take some questions. Thank you all so much, everyone. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be working with such an incredible group of people.
And thank you and everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is that Meryl?
Yeah.